Dr. Angela Puca, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm okay. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, I'm really excited to speak with you because you've created this very fascinating niche that I think is truly, it's mind-blowing, where you have this academic angle and academic side of study to something that I think gets overlooked by more traditional, the scientific lens you might call, in the sense that like you study magic, you study ancient practices, shamanism, and I really want to talk to you and understand this, to hear like more of an intersection, being a therapist, being somebody with a yeshiva background, which is kind of like a very esoteric, ancient tradition in a way. I thought this could be a very interesting conversation, and I want to talk to you all about like your experiences working with people that actually practice magic, and hear maybe some stories if you have off the bat, and just like what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. For those for those of the listeners who don't know me, I'm Dr. Angela Puca, and I have an online project called Angela Symposium. You find me either as Dr. Angela Puca or Angela Symposium, and my main platform is YouTube, but I'm on all social media platforms. And I started my project to deliver academic scholarship based on peer-reviewed sources on esotericism. And the reason why I did that is because I am an academic myself. I'm a university lecturer and I'm a researcher, and I have a PhD in religious studies. And my work is primarily anthropological. So that means that I work with people. I do field work with people. I participate in rituals. I undertake initiations so that I can understand from within the practices. And one of the things that I noticed by doing field work and working with people is how much people are interested in the research and in what scholars have to say. The problem was that, for instance, when I did my field work in shamanism in Italy, a lot of people thought that Mircea Eliade, for instance, was the authority on shamanism. And I thought, wow, I mean, that's like outdated from an academic point of view. And the fact that they thought it was still a current reliable source made me think, wow, we really don't do our job very well, do we? Because, if you go to any religious studies conference, somebody, a scholar like Mircea Eliade, is very outdated, and his work has been challenged many times by more recent scholarship. So I thought, okay, so clearly practitioners are interested in the academic side, but we in the ivory tower, so to speak, are perhaps a bit we're not doing our job well enough in terms of allowing the general public to know about the research that's going on. So unless you are part of the academic system, or unless you are doing a PhD or are you're affiliated to a university, you might never really get in touch with this kind of research. So I thought, okay, I'm going to start my project and I'm going to try and make academic scholarship entertaining and somewhat fun. That's why I always say academic fun on my project. That's how my project started. I thought I want people to have the tools, not because I think that people should do whatever academia says, but because at least they have the information, they have the facts, and they have the historical evidence, and then they do whatever they want with it. But at least the sources and the information is there.
So that's why I'm very fascinated with what you do, and with Dr. Justin Sledge and similar creators, where you guys actually have years under your belt studying this in a formal academic way and shining light on something that I think gets overlooked, is seen as superstitious, is seen as like no place in our modern world. And I love that you're bringing attention to it and showing people like what it actually is. So I really am fascinated. I know that you've worked with, like you've done field work where you spend time with people that actually practice magic or something of that nature. And I wanted to really discuss that with you and like understand what that's like. What is it like in these communities and these places? What do they believe? What is misunderstood about them? And I'm also really curious, and I'll ask you, like, have you seen magic that actually works, in the sense that like they're actually doing something. This isn't something that's like divorced from reality. This actually creates the healing or whatever the promise is.
That's a typical question that also my informants have when I do field work with them, and there's a ritual, and then the morning after it's like, oh, have you seen what happened? Now you cannot deny it. You cannot deny it. They treat me like I'm the uber skeptic for some reason. Well, I know that I think some practitioners have this idea that academics are necessarily against magic or witchcraft and treat them like these odd people that do bizarre stuff. But at least in religious studies, I know that it can vary depending on the field in academia and in university. But in religious studies, I think that everybody is very respectful of whatever practice they study. You know, from witchcraft to Scientology to Christian sex. So whatever it is that people study, I always find that my colleagues are incredibly respectful. But yeah, to answer your question, obviously there are things that happen on the field, especially um, when you deal with magic and shamanism. So I don't think that what people believe is divorced from reality. I think that there is something that happens when people do magic and when people do their rituals. Um, so, and it's my impression that at least based on the scholars that I know, I'm not alone in thinking this. There's I'm also collaborate with RENCEP, the Research Network for the Study of Historic Practices, and they are really trying to put forth this concept of the scholar practitioner, meaning somebody who is both a scholar and a practitioner, and they use their practice as a way to inform their scholarship. Now, even though they know well that I collaborate with them, but I don't quite agree with this kind of identity that mixes both. Not because I don't think that a practitioner can also be a scholar, and vice versa, because that can definitely happen and it does happen. But more that, in my opinion, conflating the two makes you lose on both ends and both sides, because when you approach a practice as a practitioner, you have specific aims and methodologies, and your primary goal is the meaning that you get out of it, the effectiveness of the magic, the connection with the divine, whatever the specific goal for you is. Whereas when you study a ritual as a scholar, your main objective is to get the most accurate information that you can possibly get, the most accurate knowledge. So I think that the aims are very different, and therefore the methodologies that you're going to employ to achieve that goal is going to be very different. So my personal opinion is that, but this is something that they and I still need to talk about. I propose them to have a roundtable because maybe they will convince me. But at the moment, the way that I think is that the two are different methodologies. But I suppose that I'm bringing this up to point out that there are people there's a branch of academics that also believe that you can utilize your own practices and your own magic experiences, esoteric experiences, as a way to foster your scholarship and inform your scholarship. So regardless of whether I agree or not, there is still a branch of academics that believe that, and that they are trying to make that a reality. Because at the moment, it's not something that you can do. Like if I'm on a field as an anthropologist and I have a mystical experience as a result of a ritual that I'm doing research on, it's not something that I can report in my research. And some people say that there is a way of bracketing out certain things, and it's an arbitrary exclusion. And I partly agree with that. I think that the experiences that you as a researcher have on the field may also have an impact and importance. They might not have an importance for the research questions that you have. In that case, if they are irrelevant, then it makes sense that you wouldn't include them, not because there is some kind of what's the term, sort of discrimination against the practice, because there is autoethnography. So for people who are interested, there's a branch of anthropology that's called autoethnography, where researchers also talk about their own experiences on the field. But that's that's a different thing. If I'm on the field to study a group of Italian shamans, my personal experience might not be relevant to the objective that I have for that field work.
So this is very interesting, and I'm curious to hear maybe some examples to understand more clearly what you're talking about. Like for me, bringing what you're talking about over to a parallel in the therapy field, for example, psychedelics, right? And I think there's overlap between like the magic world and shamanism and psychedelics. as well as like the healing potential for therapy. Right now, there are undergoing trials for MDMA to be approved as like a therapy substance, so to speak, meaning there would be like MDMA style therapy and psilocybin style therapy. I think even in some states it might be illegal already, but it's still undergoing trials. I think you have a lot of therapists that have tried such therapy. They've been a part of the trials and they really swear by it, but that data is more or less irrelevant with regards to like, does this then become FDA approved or whatever the approval process is? I'm not even sure what like the channels are, but meaning I think it's kind of complicated because it's like the therapist experience that has tried the psychedelics. It's not irrelevant. It's very relevant, but for some reason that doesn't move the needle. So I'm wondering, like, trying to understand what you're talking about with regards to like people that are in the field, because like you're saying, like a researcher, their job is to bring in the data, right? Like your job is to objectively understand what's being shown to you. And if you're a practitioner in it, that could create like a biased lens where you're not necessarily like you have a skin in the game, so to speak. So it's like that could interfere, not necessarily, but could interfere with the data collection.
I
But that
think it
being said, too,
depends. I think it depends.
right?
I think that even if you are a practitioner, you can be objective in your study. The way that academic methodology works is to sort of limit the impact of biases as much as possible, because regardless of whether you are a practitioner in that specific thing or whether you have some other religious belief, as a researcher, you're also a human being, so you're always going to have some beliefs. So you could also argue, okay, if you're an atheist or a Christian or a Jewish or whatever it is, that's
Right.
going to have a bias on your research. But the point of what hopefully academic research does is trying to not have those biases impact the research. And that's why there's a specific type of methodology that's quite rigorous with data collection and data analysis that allows you to not let your own personal biases, whatever they are, to interfere with the process.
Right. I'm curious though, what have you seen? Like what kind of practices have you studied, and like what has this been like moving for you? Have you seen anything that like really changed your worldview in a major way?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of practices during my research. So an example would be that during a fieldwork experience, there was a shamanic retreat and people were doing shamanic journeys. And there were two people that had the same vision during their shamanic journeys, and they found out that they had something in common. I don't want to share too much information of people, but there was a symbol that they both saw, and something that connected them to the point where they realized that they needed to heal each other and work together for healing. And I thought it was really beautiful. I suppose that it made me think about how much magic and esotericism is about connection. That's how if I had to describe magic, not from an academic point of view, because obviously academic definitions need to be much more precise than that. But personally, from a personal point of view, I think that magic is all about connection. That connection is the primary way that magic works, and perhaps also the primary goal of magic. Connection. Because without connection, if we weren't in a state of interconnectedness to begin with, then we couldn't affect things at a distance, could we? So it's probably a prerequisite in the cosmology of somebody that believes in magic to believe that things are connected with each other by invisible ties in a way. So the point is understanding what those ties are and how to pull one so that it affects another at a distance in the way that is desired. But I also think that the state of connectedness is something that can be achieved through magic, even though a lot of people think about magic and esotericism as something that is mostly aimed for worldly goals and achievements. I think that it is also something that affects the person and the way that they are in the world. That always makes me think about a conversation that I once had with my professor at university, who was my former mentor before my PhD, during my bachelor's and master's in Italy. and he's from Rome, and he's a professor of Indian philosophies and religions. Well, was, now he's retired, and he's really much into Vedanta, but also into Buddhism. And we had a long conversation at one point where it seemed like Buddhist Vedantin against magic, the person who is interested in magic kind of thing. Because he said, why would people want to do magic? Because it's something that is just gonna derail you from the goal of enlightenment, because it just feeds your ego and enlarges your ego more and more. And he gave me the example of a story from the Buddhist canon where the Buddha encounters a sorcerer, and the sorcerer says, after 30 years of practices, now I can walk on water and cross the river. And the Buddha replies saying, you could have just taken a boat. And obviously it's a story that is going to imply you wasted 30 years, because what's the point of you walking on water other than feeling like you're this superhuman person? And I replied to that I thought that the point for that sorcerer perhaps was not to walk on water to feel like a superhuman. Maybe the point was to have such a deep connection with all the elements, to the point where I finish and when you start dissolves. And so that's where the walking on water can happen, when there is a state of pure connectedness that goes beyond the limitations of physicality. Surely if if his goal was just to cross the river, he could have taken a boat, but perhaps
Right.
the point was not crossing the river. Maybe it was to cross the limits of the self. So I don't agree with people that say that magic or asceticism are just tools for the ego and to feel like you're this.
Interesting.
Um,
I'm very curious, like what you see as like the reasons people get into magic percentage-wise. Do you find that most people are in it for this, like dissolving my sense of self with where I begin and where the world is? There's this deep connection with the universe, or is it more like, I think manifestation is kind of like a hot word, and there's this idea of like just attaining more material wealth or whatever the case may be for why somebody might want to utilize something like manifestation. But what do you see as like the reasons people get into magic? And does that even make a difference? Like, do you think that would change anything at all? Like, I think at the end of the day, even Buddhists or any religion, any person going into a religion for, the ultimate goal of that religion might be enlightenment in their way that they preach or know how. But do all the people that practice it align with that goal? Or, many people just have it for their own reasons, whatever they may be.
Yeah, I think that everybody really uses these kind of tools in the way that they want. But in terms of what attracts people to magic, I think it definitely varies. And there are definitely a lot of people that are attracted to magic or asceticism or manifestation just as a way to improve their lives. Or perhaps one of the very, very common reasons is a sense of lack of agency over your life, that you feel that you want to expand your agency in your surroundings. So in a way, having more achievements or achieving one thing or another that you don't have, and overcoming the sense of powerlessness, which we all have, because we're all powerless in the face of life. We didn't decide to be born. We won't decide when we're gonna die. So I think that we are, as human beings, entrenched with a sense of powerlessness because we are conscious to the point where we know this very major limit that awaits us. And it's also interesting how we worry about what happens after death, but we don't worry as much about what happened before we were born, because it's kind of the same type of scenario. But I think that as a way of coping with that kind of powerlessness, and the powerlessness can manifest in different ways. For some people, it is material things. It is things in their lives that they are unhappy with. For other people, it is a sense of lack of meaning and powerlessness from a more mystical point of view. And I think depending on the person, they might be attracted more to the theological things and the mystical side of magic, or to the more material one. There are a lot of people that also want to help their communities, especially in more shamanistic type of practitioners. They tend to really want to help the community and help with healing or soul retrieval or whatever the ritual may be that needs to be done for the community member. So that's also a way of helping the community and creating a bond with the community as well, because when you help somebody, that's going to create a link bond.
It's really fascinating, and I love all the various points that you make. And something that's coming to mind is like, I think about how a lot of these like shamanistic traditions were truly interrupted by just, I don't know, we could just, I'm sure, list it on and on, like monotheism and Christians killing pagans, and like colonialism, all this stuff, just devastating more native communities. As like somehow it survives. And I'm curious a little bit, I know this might seem like random different thoughts, but like, it seems almost like there's a popularity contest with like the magic or shamanism, in the sense that like followers or just the popular idea seems to be what people think is the correct idea, when in reality that might not be like the original, like the tradition, right? Like it might be a break from tradition, or like mixing and matching different traditions together. I mean, how do you see that angle? I don't know if that was like a clear enough question, but how do you see that? And how do you see as like what the, like, do you find importance in actually like respecting the tradition, or do you think like it's okay to mix and match, or do you think anyone should just do whatever they want? Like, does it even matter? Because I wonder also like how, I truly don't know. I wonder how indigenous people might feel about something like ayahuasca being used today. Like, is that how it originally developed? Is that what it was intended for? Or is it like some type of like capitalism just coming into ayahuasca, and like people just chasing the experience, as opposed to like what it was truly meant for, as like a journey to the soul dimension, or whatever it's supposed to be? I'm not an expert on it myself.
I think there are two different points in which you're talking about. One is the evolution of traditions and syncretism, and the other one is perhaps cultural appropriation. I think that those are two different things. So in terms of the first point raised about whether it's okay to mix and match and traditions, I think it depends, but generally speaking, there is no tradition that is pure and pristine. And, this is an idea of the 19th century that has been surpassed and now is considered completely outdated. The idea of a pristine tradition that, that is unchanged and untouched. And this is like a form of exoticizing and othering that is actually quite problematic. I mean, sometimes it is used as a way of valuing tradition, but in reality, what it does is to make them into a kind of fetish, into this totem of purity that doesn't really exist, because all traditions historically change over time. They acquire things from other traditions, they syncretize, they get shaped and reshaped over and over and over. And the amount of syncretism is usually very related to the communication that the specific people or tradition has. So, like, if you live in a secluded area and if you don't have a lot of communication with other people and other traditions, then you're not gonna syncretize as much, for the very obvious reason that you don't know what to syncretize with you don't have information. But even if you look at the historical developments of several traditions, including pagan traditions or Christianity, insofar as traditions get in contact with others, they will always acquire some element or another. Christianity has acquired things from paganism. Paganism has acquired things from Christianity. So there's syncretism, and cultural exchange is just a part of human experience. And so there is no tradition that is pristine. Now, does it mean that you can mix and match whatever? Probably not, because there are things that are just not compatible with each other. And in terms of, whether it's okay to use ayahuasca. And I suppose in that case, we enter more the realm of cultural appropriation. I know that cultural appropriation is a hot topic, and it's most of the time that I see cultural appropriation used is misused, because people just talk about cultural exchange as if it was cultural appropriation, and it's not. Cultural appropriation is not just doing something from another culture. It's not that at all. I just have to highlight it 10 times, because a lot of people say, oh, that's cultural appropriation. You just wear something that's Indian or whatever. That's cultural appropriation. It's not. That's not what cultural appropriation is. Cultural appropriation is a very specific type of appropriating a cultural element that has very specific traits. One of which is the fact that the culture you're appropriating from is in a power imbalance compared to your culture. So, for instance, if you are a majority in your culture and you are borrowing from a minority, that's the first red flag, because there's a borrowing from somebody who's in a dominant position from somebody who's in a dominated position, in a less privileged type of position. Then there's the element of commodifying the practice, creating a damage to the people that you are taking that cultural element from. Commodifying, I said it already, and also create some harm or damage to the people as a result of that cultural borrowing. So when these elements are in place, then you can talk about cultural appropriation. It's not just eating pizza, that it's cultural appropriation. Although I'd like to claim that on pineapple on pizza, because that has harmed Italian culture. But so it's not as easy as saying, oh, any cultural exchange or
Right.
borrowing is cultural appropriation. No, it's a very specific type
Right.
that causes harm to the people involved, that is done at the expense of people that are in a weaker position in terms of power balance, and also that commodifies something that is perhaps sacred. So there have to be lots of elements that it constitutes cultural appropriation. I know that the white sage debate. So even when I heard about white sage being considered cultural appropriation, at first I thought, what? That's odd. Why would that be the case? But then
I'm not familiar with White Sage. What's that story?
yeah, basically, there have been some colleagues of mine that have also written articles, like Helen Berger, who's a scholar from New York. And so basically there was this whole conversation about white sage. And at first when I read it, I thought, why would using white sage be a problem? I didn't understand it. But then when I actually read about it, I thought, okay, I get it now. So basically, white sage is a very limited resource for the indigenous people that use it natively. And the use of white sage that has become so widespread thanks to the New Age and esoteric communities and so on, it's just become a thing, to use white sage, and that is causing damage to the plantations. I mean, the people who had it as their native sacred plant cannot access it anymore, because it's become a commodity to the point that only if you pay you can afford it. And and in their native culture, that wasn't the case. They would just have it there as part of their sacred land, and they would use it as part of their ceremonies. So in this case, it is cultural appropriation, because it is causing damage to the people that use it natively. And it is being commodified to the point where people who have the money can get it, and people to whom that was their native sacred plant, they cannot have it anymore. So the problem is not the use of white sage in and of itself. It's more the reasons behind the use of white sage. That the fact that it's become commodified and sold to such large extents beyond what their natural environment allows them to do. So this is an example of what constitutes cultural appropriation. But if, let's say, for instance, the white sage was used by these native indigenous people and there was enough for everybody, and selling it worldwide wouldn't cause a problem to the plant, or wouldn't cause problems to the native people because they could still have access to it, then it wouldn't be cultural appropriation. So it's not just the use of the thing, it is
the context
the
really matters.
context, yes, the context around it.
So I really love what you're pointing out here, and this distinction between something that is like cultural appropriation versus exchange. And I really love how you pointed out that like all traditions are truly evolving
Yes.
all the time. Like, yeah,
Even
I think about
indigenous people borrow things
right.
from Western religions, and that's totally fine. So that's why I see that the debate around things like cultural appropriation is incredibly polarized. I hear people say, "Oh, culture cannot be appropriated. There is like stupid," and other people that think that everything is cultural appropriation. And if you eat at an Indian restaurant, then it's cultural appropriation.
That's terrible. I feel like
So
that's
it's
so
like we
yeah.
really need to fight against
Right.
polarization. I think that's a problem that is
Yeah.
affecting us as a culture, worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just encourage everybody to be nuanced about things and not to be polarized.
100. I love that so much. I started talking about politics, which is very stupid, online for the reason that I feel that the conversation is always so polarized, and it's crazy to me how everything just becomes so one-sided. And what's shocking is, this is what's shocking. I don't know. Okay, and then this is the other thing. I don't know if it's just my own personal echo chamber where I feel like everything is polarized because everything I see on social media is the polarized thing, and it always just shocks me. And I think like when I touch grass, so to speak, it's like almost everybody I know does not care at all about politics or any of this stuff. Most people just literally do not care. And then the ones that do have like much more normal or nuanced opinions. And then the ones that don't, I look at them as kind of like whack jobs. You know what I mean? Like the people that have these very extreme opinions in real life that I know, I'm just like, I feel bad for that person. Like they're not normal people to me. What's crazy to me though, is that what seems to be on the online presence uh, is at the forefront. It seems like it's these very kind of extreme lack of nuanced opinions and just what sells for some reason. Um, but I'm really glad, honestly, just backtracking. Sorry about that rant. I'm really glad about this distinction that you've made, and it makes me think about how I was in yeshiva for a while. I think I mentioned, and yeshiva is very. They have this idea, this value, which is called Masorah. So Masorah means like it's passed down from generation to generation. So in yeshiva, they believe that they have a direct connection to Moses of the Bible. So they believe that they have a direct connection from rabbi to student, all the way down to them in the yeshiva. Um, I think when you actually learn about the history, the whole idea of yeshiva actually started in the whole idea of yeshiva probably started in Europe. I think in probably the mid 1700s, by somebody named the Vilna Gaon, which is why you really only have like European yeshivas, and the ones that survived and came to America. It's a tradition from Europe. So I think like even in the way that you have it today with yeshiva, it really, even if there is some type of tradition of rabbi to student, like this institution of yeshiva where people are dedicating their lives, where that's like the cultural norm, really only started then. And even then, that was because of the cultural conversation between the Enlightenment, which was going on in Europe at the time, or maybe even before, I think. So from that, you have like this Hasidic movement. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Hasidim, but Hasidim are a type of ultra Orthodox Jews that they're very spiritual and very heavily focused on the mystical aspects of Judaism and more emotional in the sense of like trying to connect in a heart level, as opposed to just like, one of the criticisms of the Hasidic movement when it started, one of the criticisms they had of the Judaism that was going on in Europe was like there was no heart. The prayers were very stale. There was no singing, so they tried to introduce like happiness and joy. But to the others, that was seen as like heresy. So they started this as like to combat that. But all of this is going on in this time in Europe, and like you see how like Jews all over the world had very different experiences based on like the conversation around them. So it's funny, like even if you wanna, even if people argue like there's this idea of like tradition and keeping that tradition alive and real, it's impossible not to interact with the culture around you and create like actually seismic shifts down the line, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to backtrack a little bit too about you mentioned these two people that they had a similar vision. So is that like a magic being used to create like an altered state of consciousness that they both in this space had like a shared vision, as you put it? Like
No, they were both doing shamanic journeys on their own, and they had the same vision.
Yeah. What is a shamanic journey?
In this specific context, it was with the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, because as part of my research, I studied both transcultural shamanism and indigenous shamanism in Italy. So transcultural shamanism is a form of shamanism that is based on techniques. And, you learn the techniques, and regardless of where you do it, you're supposed to get the same exact results. And one of the most famous forms of transcultural shamanism is the one that was created in the US by Michael Harner, called core shamanism, or part of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. And that has the concept, it's called core shamanism because it's meant to distill the core of all forms of shamanisms to the point where you have the technology and you can use it regardless of your cultural background, and you don't need an initiation and nothing of that sort. And in core shamanism, there isn't a use of psychotropic drugs. So the older state of consciousness is created by the monotonous sounds of drums and rattles, and by certain visualizations that you do, depending on whether you're trying to travel to the lower world, the middle world, or the upper world. You will have a different type of visualization. But yeah, it's usually done in the dark with drums and rattles, and that's what's gonna instigate the altered state of consciousness. Whereas indigenous forms of shamanism tend to have other ways of accessing altered state of consciousness. Sometimes it involves psychotropic drugs, but sometimes it really doesn't. Like, not in my experience in the Italian context, there isn't really the use of psychotropic drugs. There were some of my informants who reported using them. Those were people more interested in transcultural shamanism and those kind of trips that are done for Westerners to try peyote or ayahuasca, those kind of things. But in terms of what happens in the Italian context in of itself, it doesn't really involve psychotropic drugs. Though there are Italian practitioners that do, as I was saying, but that's not specifically part of the Italian tradition.
That's fascinating. Is this Italian tradition, is this surviving from the I don't know what you would call like the mythology that the Romans believed in, but like Jupiter, Pluto? Is it connected to this pantheon, or is it like its own separate thing that survived, or how does this? Yeah.
So this is something that if people are interested in, I have a book with Brill. Actually, I have it here. This is the book version of my PhD, pretty much, called Italian Witchcraft and Shamanism. And I have another book on the way, and an online course on Italian Witchcraft and Shamanism on my website, drangelapuca.com. So it's complicated. That's why I gave the introduction, because it's like I'm only gonna be able to give you like a taste of it, but it's quite complex. So the folk magic practices that I systematized under the label of tradition of segnature, and that I argue to be the Italian indigenous shamanism, are practices that at the moment are quite embedded in a Catholic worldview. And for the new generation of segnatori, these practitioners, they tend to syncretize a bit more with paganism. As part of my PhD, I was in the field of anthropology, and in anthropology, you work on the contemporary world. But as part of the book that I'm working on and the online course that I'm delivering at the moment, I thought that I would give myself the chance to also look at the history and how all the practices are, because it's not something that I could do for my PhD. You've got, when you do academic research, you've got to stay in your field. If you're in history, you're in history. If you're in anthropology, you're in anthropology. So I thought, given that the book that I'm writing now is not academic, it's for the general public, I thought I can do what I want. So I started doing historical research. And I was expecting to not find anything, because I feel like a lot of practitioners want a practice to be very old and very ancient, and then when you look at it and you look at the facts, it's not, because most practices just really change over time, and all these claims about unchanged traditions and unbroken chain are very easily debunked from a historical point of view. So you can imagine how surprised I was when I found that it's actually an ancient practice. Well, not ancient to the
Oh,
point of the Romans, but perhaps I would need another research to take that up and work backwards. But at least based on what I could find, based on documentations and evidence, the first occurrence that I could find of the term segnatura used in reference to exactly the same ritual practice that is done today was in the 1500s. And it was from a court case where a woman was accused of using a segnatura, and there was a description of the practice, and it was exactly what we do today. But there were also earlier references of the practice without the use of the label, and I could go as back as the 9th, 10th century. So we're talking about a millennium old type of practice, which is quite shocking to me, because I thought
yeah.
I would just go back like 3-4 generations, because with folk practices and oral traditions, it's like how well can they be preserved if you don't even have anything written? But looks like they can be well preserved. So I don't have any evidence other than what my informants say. My informants claim that some of the segnature are from the Etruscan times or the Phoenician times. Quite a few of my informants say that there's a specific segnatura that has Coptic, the same Coptic that is in the Greek magical papyri. So there are claims on the part of my informants that the practices are ancient and older that I could find evidence for. But, if I don't have the evidence, I cannot claim that kind of historicity. But I'm,
Right.
lack of evidence is not evidence of absence, I suppose. So if there
Right.
is you would probably need like a proper PhD to look at the all the archival documentation to see whether it's there's some solid
Yeah.
evidence of it being older. But as far as I could
It lines up.
see, we could go back to the 10th century or so.
That's still really fascinating. That's mind blowing. I'm curious though, like, how do you see if they're not passed down from that long ago or whatever the case may be, like how do you see these practices being like invented? Like how does somebody discover this? How does it form into like a tradition? What's your best guess on that? If
What do
not,
you mean?
meaning like you're saying, even if this practice is like 1,000 years old and doesn't necessarily date back, like you're saying you're open minded to it. So the fact that it might be, back to the days of the Phoenicians and earlier times. Because we're talking about like I don't know when Christianity really takes off in Europe, but I'd assume that the Christians would have tried to destroy any type of magic or heresy, anything that they would have deemed as like this is witchcraft or whatever, right? What are your
It's
thoughts?
not as
Sorry.
simple as that, because
Okay.
even in the Christian context, you have magical practices today and
Right.
for different centuries. So again, given that we always want to foster nuanced views on things and not polarized
Right.
thoughts, it's not like Christianity
Yeah.
is against witchcraft. I mean, on paper it is, but in reality it
Mm.
isn't. In reality,
Right.
it depends, because there are a lot of magical practices that have gone
Mm.
unnoticed or that have completely unbothered the church, and it completely depended on the framing of the practices. Like in the Renaissance, for instance, there were a few magicians and philosophers that completely went under the radar, and the church was completely unbothered because they had a specific framing of their magic. So they would distinguish between natural magic and demonic magic. So they would
Oh.
say natural magic is just using what God has given you and using the elements and understanding the hidden book of nature. Whereas demonic magic is the magic that uses spirits or forces. So there was this idea that if you invoke something or somebody, if you invoke a spirit, then that's not okay. Whereas if you do magic
Yeah.
that's natural magic, then it's fine. So it's not as
Interesting.
easy as saying Christianity was against magic outright, because
Right.
even
Right.
though
Right.
on paper it was, de facto it wasn't. And even nowadays, you find that there are even churches that would help the local healer or the local witch, and others that are more against it, and others
Mhm.
that it depends. If it is a healing practice, they say, okay, that's fine. If it is an evil eye type of thing, then they say it's not fine. So it's never
Mhm.
been as clear cut as everything witchcraft is forbidden, or
Uh,
but and
yeah.
it's also like that in the Bible. I have
Yeah.
a video on that on my YouTube channel that has angered a lot of Christians. Yes,
Yeah.
where I say that witchcraft is not outright forbidden in the Bible, because if you look at the, if you look at the untranslated version, it's not about witchcraft. You don't have a term for witchcraft in the Hebrew Bible. You have terms for diviners, soothsayers. So it's not usually the what is forbidden is not what we would consider this big umbrella of magic or witchcraft, but there are very specific practices that they forbade.
Yeah.
And the practices were forbidden in the Hebrew Bible where was the magic of others. It,
Yeah.
so because
Yeah.
the whole point, to me, it seems like the whole point of the Hebrew Bible is a way of the Israelites to reinforce their identity as a group, as a culture. So everything that was other, it was not okay. So like the divination done by others is not okay, whereas the Urim and Thummim, that's fine. So
Yeah.
it seemed to me like it was more preservation of their own identity, given that they were sort of roaming around. They were trying to preserve their identity by having these unified God and these unified practices that were accepted, and the practices of the others were not accepted. So you see this
Right.
recurring theme, in my opinion, that the practices of the others are witchcraft, the gods of the others are demons, and they are not
Yeah.
okay or false or negative in
Yeah.
some fashion. So yeah.
Yeah. That is really fascinating, honestly. That like this idea of like wanting to have your own identity. So it's like your brand of magic is okay, the other people's brand is not, in order to kind of create this idea. I mean, what I was kind of asking you earlier, which I'm really curious about, is like, for example, you mentioned this. I forget the word that you used, but there was an American that you mentioned that started the international.
Michael
In-
Harner, who started Core Shamanism, the Foundation for Shamanic Studies.
right. So he has this method of going to the upper lower world that, like, independent of whatever your traditions are, like you'll be able to have a similar vision or experience. How does somebody like him or any of these, how do you see them like discovering this, and how do you see them spreading it? And like, what's the point of it too?
Um, what do you mean? How do they discover it? How do they find out about this practice? Usually
Yeah, like how
by
did,
books.
yeah. Okay. Oh, meaning so he didn't create it. It was just something that he learned about and then
Well, he created core shamanism. Yes, I mean he founded the Foundation for Shamanic Studies and created the system or the tradition of core shamanism. Um,
right.
so yeah, I think a lot of
So how
people
did
find
you
out.
stumble on it?
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying, I mean, like, how do you stumble on this? Like, you
I
know,
think if you have an
um,
interest in shamanism, it's very likely that you will come across Carlos Castaneda's books, and in the same bookshelf department where you find Carlos Castaneda, you will find Michael Harner, Core Shamanism, Sandra Ingerman, and other people from the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. So I think it's
right.
probably the easiest form of if people are interested in shamanism, it's very easy to come across these traditions because they are very open and
Yeah.
very popularized.
Right. Okay, that's fascinating. I'm curious also. I have so many questions. I'm curious, like, what do I understand it's probably like very different. Like you're saying there are different magical traditions and practices that do very, very different things. What to you do you see as like the primary point of it? Like for example, I might say like in Judaism, the primary point is to connect with God, right? Like, and that is enlightenment. That's your ultimate purpose. Like your ultimate purpose is this connection. And their methods, all the rituals, all the practices are traditions and things that are passed down. It's kind of like a technology in a way to achieve that aim, right? Like that's the idea ultimately. It's like, is there something like that with regards to like magic? And I'm sure it probably depends on the different traditions and like where we're talking about and who we're talking about. Yeah.
So what's the aim of shamanism or magic practices
Yeah.
in
Or
general?
Magic. Yeah, I'm also curious too. Like, I guess I don't know how to draw these lines clearly enough. Like, with I'm sure magic and shamanism are not the same thing, right? Like, shamanism, from my understanding, is like this person that connects you to something spiritual, whether that be a spiritual dimension or something like that. Like, they're meant to guide you through that. Right? Like, that's the idea of a shaman. But like, and from my understanding, but like, is there? Yeah, is how do you see magic in that? I feel like I'm kind of rambling because I don't even know how to like draw these lines in my mind.
Okay, so we can say that what's the point of magic and of shamanism is very dependent on the practitioner. I think that
Right.
shamanism tends to have more of an element of being in service to the community, especially indigenous forms of shamanism. Transcultural forms of shamanism tend to be more in service of the self, like trying to heal yourself, trying to reconnect with yourself, trying to connect with allied spirits. In shamanism, it's common to do shamanic journeys also to acquire allied spirits so that you can do future works with the assistance of allied spirits so that these works are more powerful. In magic, some people work with spirits, deities, entities, and other people don't. There are even people that are atheistic witches, and they perform witchcraft as a way to engender a psychological change, but they don't believe in the metaphysical side of it. So they just believe that if they do the ritual, it's going to have an impact from a psychological point of view that will cascade into their daily reality. But they don't believe that there's some kind of metaphysical intercession that plays a role.
Yeah.
So that's also interesting. So it completely depends on the practitioner, on the tradition. So different traditions may have different outlooks, but it still highly depends on the single person. What the aim of the magic is gonna be, because
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
can range from helping the community, helping others, to helping yourself get a better life, a better job, the love of your life, or having a contact with the divine. So the range is quite wide. It very much depends on the person.
Yeah.
I've also met people that are not interested at all in worldly gains with magic. They say the only thing that I'm interested in is finding meaning and find a connection with the divine, however it is framed as God, goddess, deity, the universe, however it is framed. But there are also people that have as a primary goal the connection with the divine.
It's truly fascinating, honestly, and I'm curious, like, what are the technologies that you've seen that do that? And like you mentioned this altering of the state of consciousness, not using substances even. I want to understand that more. That truly does blow my mind. Like Dr. Justin Sledge is doing a series right now on at the time of this recording, he's doing a series on Merkaba mysticism, which was like a type of mysticism used a very long time ago um, to alter your state of consciousness. As far as I know, or I think as far as anybody knows, there were no substances involved. Um, that could definitely be wrong, but it just fascinates me that like it's possible to perceive something like a shared space um, in something that is not what we would consider physical reality. Like there's like a place that somebody could go to mentally that is shared. That like you mentioned these two people that they had the similar vision, a similar symbol. Like there's some whatever you want to call it. Like it's so funny also because I think in Western terms, like we use such different language to describe the same thing. Like, I think like you could say like collective unconscious, right? Versus like the spiritual realm. And even the collective unconscious is not necessarily something that like everybody agrees with, but um, it's just a different it like becomes a more acceptable term, I think, for people to take in as opposed to like a shared I don't know, yeah, shared space of like a spiritual realm or something.
Mm. Yeah, it's I think that's also part of the sort of quote unquote secularization, where people want to feel like what they believe in is acceptable. Um, so I think people that are part of the majority of the dominant religion don't feel the pressure as much as people who are part of minority religions like esotericism, magic, and so on, to prove the fact that they are not crazy. I don't think that Christians feel the need to prove themselves when they believe that Jesus was born out of a virgin woman. But
Right.
because that's dominant religion, and it just feels like it's the norm, despite the fact that the claim is quite out there. But then people that are not part of the dominant religion feel more the pressure of having to prove the fact that, what they believe in is valid.
Unfortunately, guys, at this point, my recording studio software glitched and there was an extra 15 minutes of recording that was not saved, unfortunately. And it was an amazing conversation. Dr. Angela Puca is incredible, incredible thinker and resource available on many, many social media platforms. Her links are in the description. Her handles are in the description. Check out her YouTube channel, Angela Symposium. She does incredible work in academic esotericism and shamanism, and it's really, really, really interesting. So I hope to have her on again because, that last 15 minutes, she revealed the secrets of the universe, which unfortunately you'll have to stay tuned for next time. This glitch was already taken care of because on my next episode, where I'm having Keith, who is one of the founders of IPI, Integrated Psychiatric Institute, we talk about the future of therapy and psychedelics, and it is just a really interesting, cool conversation where we heard his story as well. So guys, stay tuned. Again, check out Dr. Angela, links in the description. She's amazing. And thank you so much for listening. Guys, subscribe, stay tuned, follow, rate me 5 stars, share it with your friends, because this will help me grow, okay? And if you want to hear more incredible content and help me get access to incredible guests, so that's what we got to do. Hustle to, I don't know, get more followers or something. You guys, think for yourselves. You're more capable than you think you are. Stay curious and to the rebellion. See you next time.